While the Spanish were trying to chart a western route to India, the Portuguese were making their way east. However, the huge continent of Africa stood in their way. Therefore, during virtually the entire 15th century, various Portuguese expeditions sought to find a viable route to the east. Along the way, they established trading posts and forts all along the west coast of Africa. The Portuguese were driven by a thirst for adventure, wealth, and the spread of Christianity. Their voyages of exploration and presence in Africa not only reshaped the known world, but also paved the way for centuries of cultural exchange, commerce, and ultimately conflict and a booming slave trade. How's it? My name is Dr. Jacob Seynert. This is Stashy, and you're watching The Historian Stash. Portuguese expansion into Africa began in the early 1400s with the desire of King John I to gain access to the gold-producing areas of West Africa. The trans-Saharan trade routes between Songhai and the North African traders provided Europe with gold coins used to trade spices, silks, and other luxuries from India. At the time, there was a shortage of gold, and rumors were spreading that there were states in southern Africa which had gold. This news encouraged King John's son, Prince Henry, also known as Henry the Navigator, to send out expeditions to explore these possibilities. At first, the Portuguese established trading stations along the west coast of Africa rather than permanent settlements. They built forts at Cape Blanco, Sierra Leone, and Amina, known today as Elmina, to protect their trading stations from rival European traders. In this way, the Portuguese diverted the trade in gold and slaves away from the trans-Saharan routes, causing their decline, and increased their own status as a powerful trading nation. During the 1480s, the Portuguese came into contact with the Kingdom of the Congo, situated south of the Congo River in what is today northern Angola. The Congo became powerful through war and capturing and enslaving the people they defeated. The Portuguese didn't conquer this region, but chose rather to become allies of the Congo king. The king was eager to make use of the Portuguese teachers and craftsmen to train his people. He also allowed Catholic missionaries to work among his people. Importantly, the Portuguese traded guns for slaves captured by the Congo in wars against rival kingdoms in the interior. Other than small amounts of copper and raffia cloth, the area didn't provide any profitable trade in gold or silver, which was disappointing for the Portuguese. But the trafficking of slaves from their hosts more than made up for this disappointment. In the 1490s, sugar plantations were established in the islands of São Tomé and Príncipe. The Portuguese settlers on these islands used slaves brought from the Congo traders to work on these plantations. Very soon, São Tomé became the largest producer of sugar for Europe. When Brazil became a Portuguese colony in the 1530s, the demand for slaves to work on the sugar plantations established there increased. São Tomé became an important holding station for slaves before they left on the transatlantic voyage to South America. As the demand for slaves increased in Brazil, the São Tomé traders found a better supply of slaves further south near Luanda and Benguela. Wars fought in this region provided a constant supply of slaves. In exchange for slaves, the Portuguese provided the Ndongo and Lunda kings with guns, cloth, and other European luxuries. The guns enabled the kings to defeat their enemies and maintain a dominant position in the region. In 1641, the Dutch seized the slave trade in Angola away from the Portuguese, and they were able to control it until 1648, when the Portuguese took back control again. Angola only became a Portuguese colonial settlement after the decline of the slave trade in the 19th century. The Portuguese introduced agricultural products grown in South America such as maize, sugarcane, and tobacco. Coffee plantations were introduced to Angola in the 19th century. Coffee is one of Angola's major exports today. The Portuguese introduced guns to the region, which changed the nature of warfare and enabled their allies to dominate other kingdoms. The result of this was that the region was constantly at war, and millions of young people, mainly men, were forced to leave Africa and work as slaves in the Americas. The Portuguese language is mainly spoken in urban areas of Angola today. However, the indigenous languages have survived among the rural population. In modern Angola, about 90% of the population is Christian, mainly Catholic, as a result of Portuguese missionary activity in the area. The remainder of the population follows traditional African religions. Well-established gold and ivory trade networks existed between African kingdoms in the interior and cities on the east coast of Africa. For centuries, Arabs had traded with African kingdoms such as Great Zimbabwe and Mwana Mutapa in order to supply Arabia, the Persian Gulf, India, and even China with African ivory and gold. The Arab settlers intermarried with the indigenous African people living along the east coast. They introduced Islam and influenced the development of the Swahili language. A new coastal society emerged that was a mixture of African and Islamic traditions. This prosperous society built beautiful cities along the coastline from where they conducted trade with Arab merchants. The most important of these cities were Zanzibar, Kilwa, Mombasa, Mozambique Island, and Sofala. In the 16th century, the Portuguese drove the Arabs away from the east coast of Africa and established their own trade monopoly in the region. They arrived with heavily armed ships and demanded that the Muslim sultans or rulers accept the authority of the King of Portugal by paying a large tribute. If they refused to do this, the cities were looted and destroyed. The Portuguese regarded this as a continuation of the Holy Christian War that they had been fighting against the Muslims in Europe for centuries. Zanzibar was the first of these cities to be attacked in 1503. The city was bombarded with cannon fire from the ships of Portuguese captain Rui Lourenço Ravasco. In 1505, Francisco de Almeida arrived with 11 heavily armed ships that destroyed Kilwa, Mombasa, and Barawa. To strengthen their position along the coast, the Portuguese erected massive stone fortresses in Kilwa, Sofala, Mozambique Island, and Mombasa. These fortresses enabled them to control the trade in the Western Indian Ocean, as well as the trade with the African kingdoms in the interior. From Sofala, they conducted trade in ivory, gold, and slaves with the Mwana Mutapa kingdom. Trading stations were also established in Quilimani, north of Sofala, and at Sena and Tete, along the Zambezi River. Further south, the Portuguese trader Lorenzo Marques was sent to Delagoa Bay to establish trade with indigenous people living there. The capital city of Portuguese East Africa, or Mozambique, would later be named after him. After the fall of Portuguese colonial rule in 1975, the name was changed to Maputo. The Portuguese did not have the best time on the east coast of Africa. They found the climate inhospitable and many died of tropical diseases. They were also constantly attacked by hostile inhabitants of the area and were unable to conquer the interior of Africa. They managed to keep control by making alliances with warring clans and promising to help them against their enemies. The Portuguese authorities believed it was their duty to spread the Catholic religion. Missionary activity began in 1560. Both the Jesuits and Dominicans were active in converting Africans to Catholicism. They even managed to convert one of the heirs to the Moana Mutapa dynasty, who gave up his right to be king and joined a convent in Santa Barbara in India. By the early 16th century, the Portuguese had established a string of bases in Asia, including Hormuz at the tip of the Persian Gulf, Goa on the west coast of India, and the Straits of Malacca in the East Indies. From these bases, the Portuguese could control the sea-going trade of the entire Western Indian Ocean. However, Portugal was mainly a maritime power, so it was not able to compete with other military powers like the Dutch, the French, and the English. When these larger European nations arrived in southern Africa, Portuguese power and control ended, and by 1650 they only had control in ports such as Delagoa Bay, Mozambique Island, and Mombasa. Portuguese East Africa, which is Mozambique today, was only recognized as a Portuguese colony by the other European powers in 1885. The Portuguese destroyed the Arab trade routes in the Indian Ocean between Africa, Arabia, and India. They also replaced Arab control of the trade in ivory, gold, and slaves with their own. They traded up the Zambezi River and interfered with the existing inland African trade. Only kingdoms that cooperated with the Portuguese benefited from this interference. To this day, the language of Portuguese is still spoken in Mozambique, but the majority of the rural population speaks one of the indigenous Bantu languages. Only 30% of the population is Christian, mostly Catholic. The majority of the population practice traditional African religions or no religion at all. Next time, we'll look at how ambition and lustful power led to the Dutch establishing a trading post right on the southern tip of Africa, thereby intertwining the destinies of the Netherlands and South Africa forever. That's it for now. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting content such as this. Until next time, from Stashy and myself, stay stashy.